My name is David Ulbrich, and this is September 9th, 2007. And what is your full name, sir?
Stanley J. Bysiewicz.
And when and where were you born, sir?
In Middletown, Connecticut, March 4th, 1922.
Which squadron were you in?
514th.
And when did you join the military, roughly speaking?
Oh, I was invited by the draft.
Ah, you were invited by the draft. The lottery you didn't want to win.
Right. And actually, I believe it was 1942.
1942. Okay, okay. And going back a little bit before that, were you affected by the hardships of the Great Depression? What was your life like during the late 1930s?
Well, I was born and raised on a farm. My dad came over from Poland when he was 16 years old. I had actually 3 brothers and 1 sister. Growing up, we managed to actually get indoctrinated with what work was all about. We had a dairy farm, and in addition to the dairy, we raised tobacco, potatoes, and cabbage. Back in those days, the German and Polish families had cold cellars, so they would buy anywhere from 6 to 12 bushel of potatoes, and of course they needed some cabbage to make sauerkraut.
Oh, of course.
So that was the reason for the potatoes.
Oh, yes.
The cabbage to go along with the dairy, which actually got us up early in the morning before we went to school. We took care of the milking and getting the cows out to the pasture. We took our shower and then went on to school. It wasn't an easy life, but we enjoyed it and managed to have fun. I had 2 brothers that were in the service. My oldest was drafted to help my father on the farm. The rest of us actually had the opportunity of going to high school, and after I graduated in '40, I worked at Hamilton Propeller, which is a division of United Aircraft. And the odd thing was, I ended up assembling propellers for B-24s along with a lot of other aircraft. In fact, the person that I worked with, instead of going into the service, he went to work for Hamilton in a service area someplace in Africa. And I ended up buying his 31 Model A Ford Roadster, which actually, after I was drafted, they used on the farm to pull the hay up into the barn. At that time, they didn't bale hay, it was loose hay. And you had a fork that was stuck into the truck loaded with hay, and it would actually go up to the center of the barn and then either left or right hay mow. And he used a Model A to pull that hay up. And when I got back from the service, I decided to go to college and actually took that Model A with me to Philadelphia. And when I graduated, I had an opportunity to actually buy a car which was new car, which was difficult right after the war, but my father needed a truck, so we worked a deal where wherever he was able to purchase a truck, I wanted to get an automobile. And I bought a 1948 Chevrolet, I think for like, I don't know, $1,200.
That was a pretty penny at that time.
Right. But the fact was, I was able to sell that $25 Model A Roadster for $350, and that wasn't a very bright move, because had I kept it
Yeah.
later as an antique,
Sure,
probably
sure.
would
Well,
have gotten
you know,
10 times that amount.
it's one of those woulda, coulda, shoulda things, right?
Right.
Right. In terms of being drafted, when you went through the draft board and went through the induction process, how did you find yourself in the, I guess would be the Army Air Corps at that point? How did you find yourself?
Well, as a matter of fact, it wasn't the Army Air Corps, because we were people that were drafted in Connecticut went up to Fort Devens,
Oh, all right.
and I ended up in a amphibious engineer organization, which is kind of strange, because that's the same organization that one of my brothers was involved in, and he was involved in that Fifth Army deal in Africa and Italy. And my other brother happened to be in England, and he was a crew chief on a B-17. So we never saw each other, of course.
Fort Devens, was that the 1st Infantry Division? That was, at one point, the 1st Infantry Division was there for...
Could very well be. But while I was taking basic training, Air Corps came in and were recruiting people, volunteers for the Air Force. So that's where actually I applied, took a test, and actually went down to Nashville to be classified for one of the Air Force training schools. And of course, everybody wanted to be a fighter pilot.
Well, yes, and there's not too many of those. So
Right.
What did you end up doing?
I ended up being a bombardier, and actually went, basic training, I believe, was at Ellington Field in Houston. And from Houston, went to a gunnery school in Laredo, right on the border of Texas and Mexico. And I guess the funniest thing that happened to me in a gunnery school was that we actually were seated in a single-engine plane and given instructions to shoot at a target that was dragged by another airplane. And actually, I thought I saw the thing that was being dragged, and I fired a couple of shots at it, and all of a sudden the plane went down, and I thought I was going to actually get lifted right out of the airplane, but that was a signal that it wasn't time to shoot yet.
That's
the
not
pilot managed to pass on that message very vividly.
I'm sure. Well, from what I've read in terms of training, there were, a good number of accidents and mishaps during training, especially when you were flying, and instructors and that sort of thing. There are people flying into mountains and all sorts of crazy things like that.
But in any event, from gunnery school, went to Midland, Texas, which I guess is where the Bushes made all their money in the oil fields.
Yes, a little later, I think, but yes.
Right. And actually, I think we graduated in the first class of 44. And
and about when was that, late 1942 then, when you graduated?
No, I was drafted in 42.
All right.
But actually, by the time I finished these 3 schools, it was January of 44.
January of 44, okay.
Right.
Understood.
And we went to Westover Field in Massachusetts to actually where the crew was assembled, and picked up a B-24, brand new one. And from there, we spent about a month in Georgia, Savannah, Georgia, at Childress Airfield. We made one trip to Cuba, I think, on a bombing mission. But from there, we took the southern route, taking the airplane with us to Italy, flew down to, I think it was Belém, I think that's in Venezuela, and then crossed over the Atlantic to Dakar in Africa, and on to San Pangrazio in Italy, a little town right at the heel of Italy, and a little surprised when we got there. It was a really friendly little town, and we had 4 people living in a tent with, of course it was winter in Italy, and they don't get much snow, but you get a lot of moisture and damp and coldness. They had a little stove that kept us warm. And a normal day during a flight would be getting up somewhere between 5:30 and 6 and going to breakfast, briefing for the mission. And our first mission, we had a couple of surprises, but I guess it's standard for the way the Air Force and the Army works. We ended up with an old battered plane, and we were tail end Charlie, so with the prop wash, we were having difficulty in keeping up with the formation, going to a target in Hungary. I guess it was the marshalling yards. And we weren't there very long before we found out that the Allies were apparently banking on the fact that if they disrupted their transportation and shut the oil down, that Hitler would finally find some difficulties. But in any event, on that first mission, when we were dragging our fanny out of the formation, I radioed the pilot and I suggested that perhaps we ought to start unloading some of our load and maybe we could keep in formation, because that was the way you get back home. If you don't keep in formation, you're the target for the fighter planes. And
Sure,
of course,
you're a straggler, right? Straggler.
You don't have much of a chance to survive with just the turrets that you have on the 24. And we had the new 24, which had turrets in the front and the back, and of course you had the belly gunner and the turret on top. In any event, by the time we got into Yugoslavia, we had dropped all our bombs in the Adriatic, but we kept in formation and we managed to get back fine. We actually had missions in France. We hit the submarine pens in southern France, in Marseille, I think it was, and Austria, Germany, and then, of course, Yugoslavia, Hungary, and Romania. But the standard diet seemed to be Munich and Ploesti.
And those were the toughest.
And those were the toughest. The gunners, particularly in Munich, really were extremely good.
The German anti-aircraft gunners.
Right. And we had one of our closest disasters at one of those missions. We were going in from our initial point to the target, and I don't remember the exact target that we had on the menu for that day, but it was, we were at, I don't know, maybe 32,000 feet, and all of a sudden we ran into some light clouds. And lo and behold, we had a group of airplanes that were coming right across our formation. And we managed to actually somehow, the pilot managed to avoid a collision, but one of our gunners, as a result of that mission, actually never flew anymore. He just got scared to death, and really terribly upset him.
So this is what we would call today post-traumatic stress,
Right.
combat fatigue, right, or whatever.
Which reminds me, our crew was made up of a flight engineer from Texas, and he was the oldest one on the crew. My guess was that he's probably 35.
So he was a senior non-commissioned officer then?
Right. He was a staff sergeant. And the co-pilot, my guess was that he was 30. The pilot was probably, my guess would be that he was 24. The rest of us was between 18 and 20. So, 6 out of the 9 crew people were young kids, really. Ploesti was, I think maybe of all our missions, we probably did maybe 14, 7 and 7, Munich and Ploesti. And the Germans actually used smoke pots to actually pretty much hide the facility from the air, and they could, of course, hear us coming, and they'd get the smoke pots going.
So that obscured the target.
Right. And
was there any way as a bombardier you could, compensate for that? What I'd really love to hear about is, the Norden bomb site. Maybe run me through what happens after your IP. What happens? You reach your IP and you make that turn into the target. Can you run me through kind of typically the checklist that you do as bombardier?
Well, of course, once you get onto the IP, of course, the pilot puts it on automatic pilot, and
that's an IP stands for initial point.
Initial point, the place that you start off and head for the target.
Right.
And what the bomb site does really is to steer the airplane towards the target. Apparently the computers in the site measure the airspeed, the wind velocity, and supposedly aim that airplane at the target.
But it doesn't really aim the bombs, it aims the airplane.
Airplane, right. And
of
course, the bombs, of course, come out the bomb bays and should actually follow the track of the airplane, I guess.
Yes, one would hope.
But, some of the airplanes had the Norden and others had the Sperry bomb site. I preferred the Norden.
Why?
Well, it seemed like it was just easier for me to manipulate. On one of those missions, we had a commander that actually was not satisfied with the first one. He decided that he'd circle around and come back and do it all over again.
So you did not drop your bombs?
Oh, no, right, the first time around.
So he says, don't drop your bombs.
Right.
Wasn't that your decision, kind of, as bombardier, or did he overrule it?
Oh, no, he apparently had, spread the word that that we really didn't do the approach properly, and he wanted to have another shot at that target. And of course, by then, the aircraft were practicing the first time around, the gunners. Of course, they did a better job. I think they knocked down about 5 planes on the second run on that target. And I think he got demoted. I was happy to hear that, because that...
That's like flying a whole nother mission, because that's when that few minutes when you're, especially, and when would this have been? Mid 44, late 1944?
Oh, it was actually early 44.
Or early 44.
Early 44. Yeah.
So you would have had. Were you still having trouble with fighters at that time?
Not as much, because the Air Force was able to put auxiliary tanks on the fighter planes so that it could actually go most of the way to the target.
So this would be the P-51
Yeah.
and the P-38s.
Yeah, right.
And then, but anyway, the really intense part of it is when you took over as bombardier, essentially flying the airplane, got into target, and then when you get close to target, they put these boxes of flak up there waiting for you.
Right.
So you had to do the whole thing all over again. It's like doing a whole other mission.
Which actually, gives the people on the ground an opportunity to, get the altitude correct where the anti-aircraft bursts.
And of course, you're flying in at the IP, correct? And you're flying level as possible. It's steady, and the pilot's keeping your speed steady, and so you're really a sitting duck.
Exactly. Now.
That must have been unnerving at times.
Of course, you don't think about that very much, because all you're worried about is hoping, you cross your fingers that they really haven't zeroed in. The other thing they used to do is they had, I don't know what, some kind of a shredded paper that we used to throw out.
Oh, right, tinfoil essentially to mess up their
Tinfoil, yeah,
radar.
I guess that was supposed to actually kind of goof up their calculations somehow.
Their radar.
We felt good throwing it out, because we thought that this was going to help us, but didn't seem to actually deceive the gunners, particularly at Ploesti and at Munich.
Yeah, of course, if you happen to be lead bombardier, though, you really didn't have a whole lot of time to think about,
right.
What was going on outside as the shrapnel's rattling around and everything. You had to concentrate on your own business. Very good, very good. What was the biggest challenge you had as a bombardier? What was a common problem, or what was the trickiest thing as a bombardier that you had to accomplish?
Well, the navigator and the pilot actually also manned the turret in front of the airplane, but
the nose turret.
The nose turret, right? And I really didn't ever think about what the most demanding aspect of the job was. You just felt that you're a part of a crew, and you did your best to do the best job you were able to do so to actually complete the mission successfully.
Sure. What did you do in terms of, I guess, maintaining your sanity? You talked about your tail gunner who just kind of cracked up. What did you do? Was it just guts? Was it patriotism? Was it some sort of religious faith? Or were you just, did you feel you were just young and invincible? Or in terms of, maintaining your composure?
Well, I think that it's a little easier when you're in a group because you feel as though you can't let your buddy down. So consequently, I think that you are stronger by having that kind of relationship that you develop with the crew for, the 6 months that it took for us to finish the missions. And we were fortunate in that none of our people ever substituted on other crews. We flew all our missions with, our crew, and that actually, I think, is an advantage because, you're part of a unit and you want that unit to get back, and you do everything you can to ensure that to happen.
Sure, sure. One of the things, I mean, this has been called the band of brothers or small unit cohesion or what have you, but one of the things that impresses me and I find compelling is in your crew you had 20-year-old men and 32-year-old flight engineer, 34-year-old flight engineer, and different parts of the country, different age groups. But from everything I've read, is you guys became essentially a family, and the pilot was the papa, and everyone did their job. Everyone looked after each other, and you had 4 officers, and then 6 enlisted. But those ranks, they were there officially, but you were friends and close. And that has always impressed me that there's that cohesion, and that. What about rank and discipline and saluting and all that stuff back at the base? Did you experience a lot of structure and discipline?
Well, as a matter of fact, you really didn't have much time to socialize. Actually, with people scattered around the area in tents, all of the officers were actually in one tent, and of course the enlisted men were in other tents. And actually, the only time you got together with other people was when you went to breakfast and when you went to your briefing.
All right.
But beyond that, there's no place to socialize. We actually, I think, finished our missions in like 5 months, and were sent back by an English troop carrier ship, and we had to get used to having fish for breakfast. And we were assigned to a B-29 unit in Colorado, and we didn't get there. And actually, I think we were there in training for 3 months when the war ended. But
so you were training to fly B-29s, or you were training other B-29 crews?
we were training to, actually go over to
the Far East, to Japan,
Pacific
to
Theater.
the Pacific Theater.
The thing that, for instance, when we always talked about on our Munich trips, that if we ever actually got hit and the ship was impaired, that we'd head for Switzerland. So that was always, a little bit of optimism that we had, that we probably could avoid becoming prisoners of war by simply, since it's so close to Switzerland, Munich was. And the other thing that we always looked, forward to do if we had to was, if we lost an engine, we'd look for a B-17 group, because the 17s were slower than the 24s, and if we lost an engine, we could keep in formation with the 17.
All right, yes, that's right.
So
the B-24s could fly a little faster.
weren't as durable because it had a small wing,
Yeah.
whereas the 17 had a large wing, and it could could take more punishment from any-aircraft.
But the 24 could carry more bombs.
I'm not
heavy.
sure on the load capacity for the two airplanes.
All right. Well, no, that's interesting to know. Hook up with a B-17 squadron; they're a little slower, and you can keep up. That's interesting. In terms of when you weren't manning the bomb site, did you take a gun placement anywhere?
Well, we take turns with the turret that was up in front, but either the navigator or myself were.
Did you ever have any tangles with? Did you ever tangle with fighters?
Really, we did not have any close calls. I think, by and large, the fighters, the Germans, would look for a straggler rather than a formation where it had, you got actually, you got 4 turrets with 2 guns, that's 8, plus you got the 2 waist gunners, 10 machine gun, 50 caliber, and if you add that to 12 airplanes, you got a lot of armor that's going out of those guns. So they make a quick pass, and we really never had any mission where where the formations were actually disrupted.
But the flak, that was always the problem. The
Yeah.
flak was the
Yeah.
real danger. Well, yeah.
Yeah.
And then,
It's interesting, if you had a close hit, you'd feel like you're getting sand on, on the fuselage and on the wings.
interesting. That's a wonderful description.
And you see that, you hear the sound, and then you see that black thing where the shell explodes, and of course that's where the damage comes, because it spreads out over a wider area.
Sure. The one of the things I find most interesting about this is some of the similarities and the stories, because it seems that sort of a little later on when you were flying, the fighters must have where the German fighters either would have been looking for stragglers, or they were pulled back to Germany proper to defend Berlin and such. Did you have occasion, or did you have occasion to see any of the Tuskegee Airmen flying escort? Because you said, I think you had mentioned earlier that the P-51s and the P-38s had their disposable tanks, their drop tanks, so they could make most of the distance. Do you recall seeing? I guess they were the Red Tails. Do you recall ever seeing any of this?
Is that the black fighter group?
Yes.
Yeah, they actually, we've had some missions where they were involved. We also had actually a group that had some Yugoslavian crews involved. And you hear on the interphone, of course, the Yugoslav speaking, and I don't know how many, maybe it was just one squadron of them, and I don't know how they got involved, but one of my classmates from Midland actually was shot down over Yugoslavia, and apparently the Patriots there were able to contact them before the Germans actually got to the area where they bailed out, and I think probably in like 10 days, they had a C-47 that flew in at night and picked them up and took them back to Italy. So.
And the partisans, if they were Tito's partisans, they
Yeah.
would help out the American down flyers, and then of course there were, I guess, the Chetniks, and then there were the Yugoslavs who backed the Nazis,
Right.
and so it's kind of a multifaceted civil war
Exactly,
there, and you never
exactly.
knew quite where you stood. Never knew quite where you stood. Can you recall? Maybe some? This is kind of a lighter question. Some of, a funny episode that happened to you or your crew, or some story about one of your crewmates there. Something that, that you wouldn't read in the history books.
Well, the only thing that comes to my mind is that actually our, and I'm not sure, the flight engineer actually had to go into the field hospital, and supposedly it's just a short visit for some physical ailment, and when he got discharged, came back, he actually bragged about making out with one of the nurses, which kind of surprised me, but I'm not sure that how true this was.
Oh well, yeah.
Maybe it was just a GI story. But,
Yeah, GI story. Actually.
yeah.
A lot of those going around. Another sort of lighter question: Did you receive letters from home, or did you write home very much? Keep in mind you were busy a lot of the time, so I mean,
And of course, the mail service wasn't all that great. Actually, they had a I don't know if they called it V-mail, that was supposed to get faster service. We didn't do much mailing. Actually, mail call was, of course, a high point to get a letter from home, but with actually both my mom and my dad weren't really letter writers, and with three of us in the service, I guess that cut down on the correspondence too. But, as far as the individual,
must have been very stressful for your parents.
I would suspect, but they never complained, I haven't, they apparently managed to work through it.
Well, we're nearing the end here. I just have a couple of more questions for you. And this is a question I ask all veterans of World War II, whether they're airmen or soldiers or Marines or sailors. Do you consider yourself to be a hero for what you did? Why or why not?
I actually didn't feel like I did anything extraordinary. It's part of a team, and I tried to do the best job I could for the job that I was trained for. And all I was concerned about is not letting them down, and doing the best job we could together, so that we'd actually be able to get back home.
Well, that's a fairly common answer. No, you didn't feel like you were a hero. You're just doing your job, trying to survive, trying to get back home, trying to take care of your buddies. It's a very common answer, and one of the reasons why I asked that question is because in 2007 the word hero is thrown around so much it's almost become meaningless. it's just used for any number of things. Oh,
Yeah.
he's a hero. So, I think for for my generation and future generations, they need to understand that hero isn't just something you throw around. It has a meaning to it, the concept. So, anyway, do you have anything that you might have thought about as we were talking that you might like to add? Any sort of closing statement or observation or anecdote or anything? Any story that you didn't tell me or any observations?
Well, I think probably had I not gone into the service and gotten into the Air Force, I'm not sure that I would have gone to college after I was discharged. I think that motivated me to actually prepare myself better for life.
So then you took advantage of the GI Bill, I take it?
Yes, I did.
That was a great sort of way to, not only, thank the veterans and make benefits, but also help smooth the transition into civilian life and also build long-term benefits for the economy and for your lives. So you went on where did you end up going to college?
Drexel in Philadelphia.
Ah, all right. I actually just finished my PhD at Temple University across the way.
One of our neighbors.
Yes, one of your neighbors. Not quite across the street like University of Pennsylvania.
Right.
But and then what did you do with the rest of your career?
I actually felt that what I wanted to do after I graduated, I actually majored in accounting, business administration, but I thought I'd like to go into sales, and when I decided that I wouldn't actually stay in the Philadelphia area, that I'd come back to Connecticut, and I went to the state of Connecticut, and they had a facility that they would actually, after interviewing you, would give you the most likely success track that I could follow. And
All right. So
one of the things they told me was that I would never make a salesman.
oh well.
I guess I took the challenge and decided that to go into the insurance business after I finished school, and spent 50 years doing just that. Matter of fact, my son-in-law, actually, who was a practicing attorney, asked if I would consider him to take over my agency when I retired. I was hopeful that my son would do that, but he had no interest in doing it. I don't think that children have interest in what their dad does. As a matter of fact, I started as an agent, and after several years was offered a management position with the company that involved recruiting and training and supervising agents, and I did that for about 25 years, and decided the company had changed so much that I decided to go back in sales. And in any event, my son-in-law took over the agency, and he apparently is doing a reasonably good job and making money for his family. And so I would think that and I enjoy people, and I just felt that you didn't have to be a hotshot salesman. All you needed to do was win the confidence of a prospective customer, and if you did a good job for that customer, he would actually make referrals so that the job would be easier in building an agency. And
Well, you know, you're not selling the product, you're selling yourself.
exactly.
Very
Selling
good.
a service.
Very good. Well, I think that's about all we have, and I want to thank you for your time and your generosity in sitting here for nearly an hour and chatting, 45 minutes, 50 minutes, whatever it was, chatting with me. And I think that your story helps fill in some of the blanks out there and helps confirm some other stories. And I just very much appreciate your willingness to do this. Thank you very much, sir.
My pleasure.
Thank
Thank you very much.